Welcome everyone to this Let's Play of Kerbal Space Program Release 1.0. Now we need more science, so we're here with Gene to see what contracts he has on offer. Now we can harvest the Mun for science, so let's take Orbit the Mun as one of our contracts. Doesn't give us very much science of its own, but gives us plenty of funds and a little bit of reputation. We can conduct an orbital survey of the Mun, for which we need to return or transmit two of the following experiments: the magnetometer, the material study, or the mystery goo. We get a fair bit of science from completing those individual experiments, and obviously we'll get the science from the experiments themselves. And right down the bottom here we have Explore the Mun. Jeb's Junkyard would like us to explore the Mun, which means achieving orbit around the Mun and transmitting or recovering science data from space around the Mun, and we have some contracts to do just those two. However, landing on the Mun and transmitting or recovering science from the Mun is a bit of a problem because we only have those very dainty landing legs, so that's the reason we need more science. So we'll only be able to complete these top two objectives. So let's accept this contract, let's accept this contract, and finally the orbital survey around the Mun contract, and then head on over to the research centre to spend the science we already have. Well, here in the Science Centre, we could go for general construction. It's the last element we require for 45 science. It gives us struts, ever handy struts, and obviously launch stabilizers could come in handy with bulky rockets. But I'm actually going to leap ahead. I'm going to spend 90 science on fuel systems so I can get the always handy external fuel duct. It will also give us the larger fuel tank as well, which will save on parts. So this is what I am going to buy in this instance. So let's head on over and have a look at the rocket that I have already prepared. Now, rather than you watch me struggle putting these things together, I thought I would prepare one earlier and then we can go through it rather briskly to look at how it's constructed. So if we look at the staging upwards, we've got a central core here with two of these larger T800 fuel tanks, and at the bottom we have a T45 swivel engine, which will give us a bit of directional control. On the outside we have two pairs of FLT 800s with the larger T30 Reliant fuel tank, and they are asparagus stage. You can just see our new fuel line in there that will feed fuel from these tanks into the central engine. And because we have the fuel tanks attached here to the T45, which has some vector thrust capability, I've decided to use these slightly cheaper AVT1 winglets rather than the usual AV8 winglets that have a little bit of steering capability. Now if we go to the next stage up, we see this is going to be our transfer and Mun orbiting stage. We have the T400 half-size fuel tank there and the LV909 Terrier engine. This is great for pretty much everything within the Kerbin system. That'll do just nicely within the Kerbin system. Now I hope to bring all of this upper craft home, but let's imagine we don't. So let's have a look in here at the upper stage, which is where we're keeping all of our science. Now inside this general purpose science bay, we have crammed all of one 2-hot thermometer. To this side we have the Science Junior, which you can just see tucked away inside there. On this side, the orbital telescope, the D-Magic orbital telescope, so we can make some short-range observations from our different positions around the Mun. And in here we have packed away our goo container. There we are, a nice miniaturized goo container in there for doing goo-related science. Now, while we're on the subject of science, if we pop open this service bay and zoom right in, we can see we have packed in amongst the batteries a magnetometer boom. So let's just deploy that and see how that fits in relation to the whole craft. There we go. See it well away from the body of the craft. And on this side we've crammed, again, you can see the batteries. We have water, oxygen and food supplies. So that are all of our science experiments and supplies packed away. We have our KOS scriptable control system hidden here behind some of our can't do without photovoltaic panels, so that should keep all of our batteries fully charged. We have our command pod here, which is going to have our pilot in it, an inline reaction wheel, extra battery, and on the outside we have 3 parachutes, which should be plenty enough for us to land all of this underlying craft. So we should be able to land the whole of this on land or in water with those 3 parachutes. So that should save us a little bit of funds. So let's just finish putting this all back together. Now, while I remember, we need to change our pilot. We're going to have a different pilot for this trip. We're not going to have Jeb. We're not even going to have Val. We are going to have Bob. And the reason we're going to have Bob is that scientists can reset experiments, and we are going to be harvesting as much science as we can so that we can get as many upgrades when we get back as possible. So good old Bob is going to have to do some EVAs. Now, that is not as simple as it sounds, not for Bob or for myself, because EVAs are not something we are very good at, but at least we have our scriptable control system ready to help Bob with the piloting activities. So let's get out onto Launchpad and get Bob into space. Welcome to Launchpad. We can see Bob in the pilot seat. Jeb has made some corrections to the staging after we did the dissection of the craft. So thanks, Jeb, for fixing that for us. Now let's get ready to get into space. So if we put the throttle to maximum, but if we try and put the SAS on, we'll see we have no pilots aboard. So poor old Bob is going to have to do this all on his own, but fortunately he has KOS to help him. So let's get our usual script running, which is the Ascend 5 script, although I've made a minor modification to it to give us a grand total of 100 kilometer apoapsis. So there we go, we are away from the launch pad. Now, because we have no SAS, you can see that KOS is struggling to keep us up on the straight and narrow. You can see we've already gone off the vertical very slightly there, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem, shouldn't be too difficult to correct a little bit later in the flight. Now, one thing Bob is going to have to do is just manage the throttle. We don't want the throttle, the thrust to weight ratio, going much above 2, particularly early in the flight. So let's just keep that tapped down just a little bit below 2. Now, we are missing out on a little bit of science as we ascend, but there is plenty more science to be had at the Mun, so we will leave that for another day. So let's just keep our thrust down. You see we've got a little bit of rotation on now as well. Roll and yaw going back and forth quite rapidly there as we desperately try to keep this thing on the straight and narrow. But it's not too bad. We've got an inclination of about 3 degrees. We can certainly sort that out. Let's just keep our thrust to weight ratio under control, and we will throttle up just before separation of our asparagus tanks. So there we go, we're just about getting ready for separation. So let's just watch them go. Let's throttle right up now. And there they go. Away go the asparagus tanks. We've got much less of a load now. But the script has tried to put the SAS on, and of course there isn't any without a pilot, so we are going to have to keep ourselves as level as possible whilst we complete the process of getting up to 100 kilometres. So let's just keep that around about the 90. Now we can correct our inclination as we go, so if we just keep that a little bit below, we can correct the inclination. There we are, 1.5 degrees. Now, as you all know, the Mun is on an equatorial orbit with Kerbin, so an inclination of 0 would be good. So we're just a little bit over 1, a little bit under 1 now, coming up to 90 kilometre apoapsis, half a degree inclination. Everything is looking good. And there we go, we've got to our intended apoapsis. So let's prepare to circularize. So let's get our node in place. Let's add a maneuver, extend the prograde handle until the two markers switch. So let's get our maneuver directly onto our apoapsis and just extend just a little bit further. And there we go. Now, Bob does have helping hand. He has a helping hand from a new script which I adapted from, helps if I'm actually focused on the map view, which I have adapted from one that is on the documentation website for KOS, which will execute any node you put in front of it. So I'll link in the description where you can find that. So let's just get ourselves roughly lined up. Let's get rid of those commands and run my node script. So let's run node. Now it's got an estimated burn duration of 66 seconds. The node is in 53 and it's just over 1,000 meters per second. So we have rotated towards the node. That's the first phase of the script complete, and we are now waiting for the burn, which is obviously half the burn in length. And now the execution has begun. Now there's two possible outcomes of executing a node. Either you could overstep the node and the blue marker flips to the other side of the nav ball, in which case you just cut your engines, or alternatively you stay very much aligned to the original node, in which case you just gently bleed off the last part of the maneuver, so just the last few meters per second. So we'll just let the script complete executing the node and then estimate for us how accurately it managed to complete the node. So we're a little bit over 2/3 of the way through. We can see the blue line there arcing away. Got about 9 seconds left of the burn. You can just see the blue marker starting to drift away as we remain pointed steadfastly at the original direction. And there we go, we had 9 meters per second left of the estimated burn, 93 and 107. So not perfect, but perfectly good for our purposes. So let's get rid of that node and set on out towards the Mun. So where's the Mun? The Mun is over here. So let's set the Mun as target and put ourselves in a node around about here. It doesn't have to be perfect to start with, and let's just extend our prograde handle and see what of an encounter we get. There we go, we've got an encounter at 514 meters for the periapsis, so let's just keep burning. 298, 149, 8,000, a little bit close. So let's just pull gently back on the retrograde marker. 19, a little bit further still, 20. There we go, 20 should be great, because remember we've got to do some low orbit science to complete our contract. So I think that will do just fine. We will adjust our orbit around the Mun when we arrive. Now, our node script will be useful for executing any nodes at all. It will execute any node that's put in front of it. So let us warp to our new node. Now again, we're missing a little bit of science, but science awaits us at the Mun. So let's concentrate on the prize. Keep your eye on the prize. Time warp is dropping down. Now what I'm going to do is, because we've got only a tiny amount of delta V left in this stage, I'm going to dump this stage now. So let's jettison that stage so we are all ready to roll with our LV909. There we are, LV909, all ready to go. It's all active. We will clean up our debris at some later date. So let's get ready and run our node again. Now, first things first, the script is intelligent enough not to actually align to the node immediately, because it knows you may want to have your craft orientated in a very particular way. If I can get the darn thing to line up. Let's have a look. There we go. So we can get our panels aligned with the sun. So if we have our panels aligned with the sun, we can get as much charge into our batteries as possible. And the script will only align when it gets to about a minute to go. So let's have a look, see how we're doing. We're fully charged, so we no longer need to remain aligned. So if it just drifts away, doesn't matter. We've got 1 minute 42, so let's just time warp a little. There we go. You can see the announcement that we should be rotating towards the node has just appeared. So it gave us about 60 seconds to complete that. So 60 seconds is plenty. With this very small craft, it was going to rotate pretty sharpish, but with that long pair of T800 tanks, not only would it have taken a long time to rotate, it probably would have rotated clean past the node itself, and then oscillated back and forth for minutes upon minutes upon minutes. So I do find with this script it's probably best, particularly with larger craft, to orientate more or less in the right direction before you start running the node script, to give it just a little bit of a head start on aligning to the node. So we've got 43 seconds to go. It should start burning around about 15, 16, 17 seconds. So let's give it... I said that, but that was estimated based on the engine we had originally. So it has recalculated and is now running off the node with the LV909 calculation. And that is one of the problems with the display down here on the nav ball. It's never up to date if you change engines before you execute the node or during execution of the node, so do bear that in mind. So this may not be as accurate as we had hoped, but let's switch out to map mode and just see our new trajectory get laid out for us. See the apoapsis extending here quite rapidly. Got about 2/3 of the way through the burn now, with 270 odd meters per second to go. Estimated burn remaining of 14 seconds. (120 meters per second to go. (30 meters). And there we go. See our trajectory laid out, and there we go. Absolutely marvellous. What do we get? We got 17 kilometers periapsis. That is absolutely ideal. So that'll be perfect for our rendezvous. So let us now send Bob on his way out towards the change of sphere of influence with the Mun. So let's click on that handle right there that will accelerate us away. Click on it again in order to accelerate up to maximum time warp for our current height, which is 10,000 kilometers. So let's just click away. There we go, accelerating out towards our change of sphere of influence. So let's click on the Mun and now focus our view on the Mun. And if you do that, it'll actually change the orbit lines to show you much more clearly what your new orbit, your new approach is going to be. There we go. We have transitioned into the Mun's sphere of influence. Now we do have a slight inclination, nothing really to worry about. So let's create our new node. So let's add a maneuver there. And this time slow down. We want to slow down into any old orbit around the Mun. So there we go. That will do nicely. We can do a lot of high altitude science way up here. In fact, down here somewhere will be high altitude science, but definitely low altitude science will be right down in here. Now let's click on our periapsis just to move the maneuver node right onto the periapsis. There we go. Should we bother? No, I'm not going to bother changing the inclination. That's fine. It's a trivial inclination. It's 3 degrees, so that'll be just fine. It may mean we come back with a decent amount of inclination onto Kerbin when we return, but we will worry about that when the time comes. Let's again remain focused on what we need to do. So again, let us click on the warp to maneuver node. It's a bit blurred there because both the handle for warp to node and warp to periapsis are on top of each other. So let's just double check. We've got plenty of electric charge, so I'm not going to worry too much about our alignment. Where are we? There's the sun. Let's just align ourselves the other way. There we go. Just align ourselves so we've got a decent amount of sunlight onto our panels. Because one of the problems I find is that I'll warp a huge distance and find myself running out of power, which is just a bit silly. So let's warp to node. We're going to have plenty of time. It's only a 4-second burn for this burn, so we're going to have plenty of time to set up. And we get a 3-minute margin, so we've got plenty of time. So Bob is hurtling in towards the node. Time warp is dropping down for us. There we go. Down to a time warp of 1. The node didn't very accurately calculate the arrival time at the node. So much for a 3-minute margin. So let's run our node script immediately. There's no time to adjust our alignments or wait for the burn. It ran it immediately, but it did pretty good job nevertheless. I mean, after all, we did only have a relatively tiny burn, so we are now in orbit. So let's crack on with all of our experiments. So here we are. We're in low orbit now. We've already got our orbit contract complete, but let's just double check what other science we need. We need mystery goo from low orbit, so let's make sure we get that one done first. So there's our mystery goo whilst near, and that's going to give us 30 science. Next we need a materials study low in orbit, so let's do a materials study. Make sure we get that one low in orbit, and that'll give us 75 science. That's excellent. Now the rest of our studies, so we've got those two. They don't show up yet until you either transmit or return them. The other one is a magnetometer scan from high in orbit. So let us collect all our other science from near. Let's do as much of that as we can. So let's do the orbital telescope. There we go, orbital telescope just there. And that is just above the Mun's Midlands, so we'll take that. We will open the service bay and then do our low magnetometer scan. I think there should be a low magnetometer scan. There we go, in space near the Mun, so we will take that. Let's do a crew report. Let's do that crew report first for 15 science. And finally, Bob is going to have to get out. I'm sorry, Bob, you're just going to have to get out. But before he does that, I'm going to use KOS to take account of the fact that we don't actually have any SAS, and instead I'm going to lock the steering to up. I know there's no up, but there is in KOS. We're going to lock the steering to up, and this will use KOS to keep the craft aligned more or less with, well, straight away from the surface. So it is going to rotate very slowly with the surface of the Mun, but at least it won't bob and Bill around. Yes, that was no pun intended. It's not going to bob around. So let's do our EVA report. So there we go. Bob is out. So let's do our EVA report. So we get 24 science for that, for just above the Mons Midlands. So let's keep that data. And while we're here, let's just store that experiment. So Bob is all ready to collect other experiments. Now this is the fun part. Probably not so much for you, and probably not so much for Bob either. Because poor old Bob now has to manoeuvre himself around these various experiments without drifting off into space, and that is not as easy for me as it appears. So that's up. So let's keep ourselves as near to the craft as we can. So let's go back a little bit and down, and let's just take the data and then restore the goo canister. Let's back up a little bit and then go down and take the data from the orbital telescope. Oops, I think I just did I bounce? There we go. Let's take the data from here, and that will automatically be reset when we take another reading. Now, the big problem with the way I have mounted the magnetometer is you really need to get very, very close to the inside of the gubbins. We'll call the technical term gubbins. So let's take the data from that experiment. What other experiments do we have? I think we've got one underneath here. Yeah, there we go, the materials bay. So let's not drift too far away. So here we go. Let's go up a little bit and forward. And Bob is just going to bob himself in here and collect the data from the materials bay. And there we go, reset the materials bay. And hidden away in this little bay here, which is not currently open, is the thermometer. So let's just open that bay. Oh, we can we can even well, let's role play this. At least open the bay doors, although apparently you can take the data through the bay doors. So let's take that data and then close up the bay. We will close up the service bay, and then we will get back inside. And Bob is only too keen to get back inside. So let's go up a little. Up you go. There we go. And let's go down. Get himself across there and grab. There we go. Let's back up a little bit and bored. I'm sure you were. You were absolutely bored. So we've stored rather a nice amount of science there. So let's just review the science. Right click on the capsule and review the 6 items of restored science, of stored science even. We have a temperature scan. We have an EVA report just above the Mons Midlands, mystery goo in space near, telescope, and we are back to, was it magnetometer scan? There we go. So that is excellent. An awful lot of very handy science. But we can use X-Science to find out a little bit more about the science we have here and now. Now, we can show the experiments that are available right now, right at this second, that we could carry out and earn more science. So, for example, we could do the magnetometer scan while in space high over in the Mun. And that's quite handy because we require a magnetometer experiment. So let's do that now. So let's take the magnetometer scan and save. That's another 10 science. So let's take that. So let's we can now retract this. We won't be needing that anymore. Although I did close the bay doors. So you didn't see that, did you? We did close the bay doors. And now we have, notice that's gone a sort of dark green. So in other words, we have collected all possible science, but we haven't returned it yet. On the other hand, we have got all the crew report science we can get for high over the Mun. We have all the orbital telescope for high over the Mun, but we don't have an EVA report for high over the Mun, and you can see we are being prompted to take one. So let's take another EVA report. So let's take that and then keep it, get another 16 science for that. So that's board. There we go. So you can see that we have now collected all possible science, but we haven't returned it yet. We have all the temperature science we could ever muster from high over the Mun, but we have 2 others. Now on previous journeys we have collected Mystery Goo and Materials Bay. This was when we did our flyby, and there's a tiny amount of science left. Now we're not being prompted for it by Science Alert because it's too small an amount, but if you're a completionist you may as well do it. Now let's just toggle this away. So let's toggle the shutter, just toggle that away, so that will hide away. What have we got here? This is the Mystery Goo, so let's observe the Mystery Goo and see if we get 6 science. So we're expecting to get 6 science. 4.6, so they can see there's just that tiny amount we can't get, but let's get the 4.6 science. We'll keep that, and then let's shut the bay doors, so you can just see we've got that tiny amount remaining, and a materials study. So where was the materials study? Well, that's down here. There we go, Science Junior. So let's observe the materials bay and see if we get there we go, 10.9 science. So there's still just a smidgen left, so let's keep that. So there's still just those tiny bits left, and that's it. We have done our mission to the Mun. So let's just toggle these doors shut to secure our science, make sure we return that all safe and sound. And you know what? I think we need to close that away. We need to get a thumbnail. So let's take that as our thumbnail, just as Kerbin disappears behind the Mun, and we now need to prepare to go home. Bob, you're on your way home. Now, the sun is over there, so we're getting plenty of light onto our panels, so they are recharging. There we go, they are recharging. We are still locked to up, so we're still perpendicular to the surface as we pass over that large crater there. So we're going to remain locked to that direction for a while. So let's just go into map view and let's just get ready to add a maneuver here to return back to Kerbin. Now I've just chucked in a bit of prograde thrust, and what I'm going to do is grab hold of the maneuver node, and you'll notice the purple periapsis there is moving in towards the surface of Kerbin, and this is going to give me an idea of where to position the maneuver node until it starts coming back out. So around about here, because remember, by the time we have orbited, the Mun is going to have moved to here, and so this will be our return directory, return direction, trajectory in this direction. So that is the position we will want to be when we eventually return. So what are we now? We're 300, 243. We can see the Kerbin periapsis written down here as well, so we don't have to 5 kilometers. I think that's too much. We want to get to about, there we go, about 23, 25 kilometers, maybe just a smidgen more, 26. I find that there we go, the sort of high 20s is probably about right. So we are now ready to return, and of course we can use our node script to return. So we've got about 100, there we go, about 100 meters per second. So let us accelerate round to our warp to maneuver node, which will give us a 3-minute margin. Didn't do very well last time, but hopefully it'll be a bit better this time. Doesn't matter too much if it isn't. These returns don't have to be as precise as sending New Horizons to Pluto, but it seems to have done pretty well this time. I suspect, yes, warp to P. If you actually warp to the blue handles, you warp exactly to the blue handles. If you warp to the maneuver node, you get your 3-minute margin. Well, that explains that, so I can't blame anybody but myself for that. So let's get KOS up. Let's unlock the steering. Make sure that is unlocked, ready to return back to Kerbin. But before we start our script, let's give the alignment element of our script a little bit of a hand. Let's just get it aligned more or less in the direction of our marker. Let's just clear this out of the way while we're ready. Here we go. And then use the up arrow to recover our run node command. And there we go. We have a node in 134 seconds, a delta 3 of 100 meters per second, with an estimated burn duration of 6 seconds. And we are waiting to align, which we've got about a minute before. We're going to align. So let's just give it a bit of a hand. The steering is not yet locked, so whilst we're waiting to align, we can either align ourselves to the sun, or as I'm doing here, align ourselves to the maneuver node, just to give our script a little bit of a hand. So let's just tap here on time warp, just to accelerate us round to about a minute to go. So we should be aligning very shortly. There we go, rotating towards the node, but we've already rotated, so we saved the script a little bit of effort and saved it oscillating back and forth around the node, which with such a small craft probably wasn't going to happen. If you do have a big craft and you find that problem, if you've unlocked RCS, try using the RCS to give your craft a little bit of a hand. That will usually give you the extra rotational control that you need to align to these maneuver nodes without oscillating back and forth too much. But if you haven't unlocked them in career mode, then just do it by hand, and even Bob could manage this, which is just as well, because he won't be going home otherwise. So we're waiting for the burn. The burn is going to happen in about 10 seconds or so time. So let's just switch back and have a final look at the Mun. Where are we? There's Kerbin. So oh, there we go. There's the Mun. So that's retrograde and prograde. So we can see ourselves facing. There we go. There we go. Launched away, firing away. There we are. We are starting to go out now from the Mun. And there we are. Just finished off with 0.3 of a meters per second. Excellent. So that's KOS done and dusted with. As we now say goodbye to the dark side of the Mun there, rotating slowly and serenely behind us. So let's just see our trajectory. So the blue line is our current trajectory, and the orange line is our predicted I'm having a hard time with trajectory. Direction. Our flight path. It's still about 28 kilometers, so that 0.3 of a meter per second lost us, well, a fraction of a kilometer. So let's warp to our maneuver node, and warping to a change of sphere of influence gives us a margin of 3 minutes, unlike warping to periapsis, which gives us no margin. So we learn something new every day. So let's warp to our change of sphere of influence. Here we go. So if I warp again, it will use the maximum time warp available at the time of clicking. If you click things to launch rockets, that is. So we're just about to exit. There we go. We've just exited the sphere of influence, and let's just double check periapsis. There we go. 28 kilometers. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Got a bit of an inclination, but we knew we would have that. And we're also going to be landing on the dark side of Kerbin, so it's going to be pretty dark for our return. But while we're out here, you'll notice we have some more science. We can do an EVA report. So let's get Bob out once more. So let's do the EVA report. He is going to do that right now. What do we get? We get EVA report while high in space over Kerbin. So that's 12 science. So we will save that and we will board. So there's no further experiments apparently. So let's just double check that with X Science. So science experiments we can do right now. We can see we've done our magnetometer, although apparently we can do a crew report, but it's only 7.5 science. So let's try our crew report from this point. Apparently we already have a crew report, so let's not waste the crew report we already have. We've collected all possible orbital telescope. We have in our stored science, we have EVA report. We have all possible temperature science, and we know we have mystery goo and materials study already stored in our pods from the MUN. So I'm not going to force Bob to go out and collect it and waste a heck of a lot of time on his journey home trying to get that tiny amount of science. It is only about 9 or so science and 4 and a bit science, so it's not really going to be worth Bob's effort. So let's go back to map mode and just see how much further we've got to go. We've got about half our journey to go, because we're right out here at Apoapsis. So let's just add time warp and get ourselves back towards Kerbin. Let's get Bob back safely on the ground, because he's got to negotiate the fiery flames of doom as we re-enter. Let's just double click on Kerbin to focus ourselves on Kerbin and accelerate time warp up to 10,000. Back down to 1,000 as we approach. And there we go. We are on our way into the atmosphere. So let's use our KOS for one last time to lock our steering. There we go. Lock our steering to retrograde. There we go. Get us pointing engine first into the atmosphere. We're just going now into the thinnest part of the atmosphere. Now, we've been offered more science. We've been offered a temperature scan and an EVA report, but I think Bob's got better things to do and to concentrate on getting through the atmospheric effects that we can see here. We're quite high up still, 48 kilometres, just beginning to get into this section of the atmosphere here. We can see that our apoapsis is coming in quite quickly, 9,000 kilometres. Periapsis hasn't changed that much just yet, because we are actually just in a very thin part of the atmosphere despite the brightness of the effects. So 6,000 kilometre apoapsis. We want to just check that as it started to come in. You can see it's coming in quite rapidly now. 5 million metres out. So there we go, 4,000 kilometres, 4 million metres. Apoapsis still coming in, 3 million kilometres. 3 million kilometres, 3 kilometres, 2,500 kilometres. We'll get there in the end. We certainly will. Bob, you're coming home. You're smiling, but you've got me assisting you with the piloting, so I wouldn't smile just yet. 1,500 kilometres, and the periapsis is now dropped to 26.5 kilometres. So there we go, coming over a landmass now. I don't know if we're going to be landing ocean or land. We'll soon see. Periapsis 25 kilometres. There we go, the camera has flipped, still tearing across. Must be giving them a much of a sight down there, whatever cities are down there, tearing across the horizon. We're now, periapsis is now in the planet, so we are definitely going to land. One way or another, we're coming down. So apoapsis is 28 kilometres. A bit meaningless now. We now know that we are definitely going to be landing. The next most important thing is for us to actually land safely. Now you'll notice the icons for the parachutes are set to red at the moment. There's a parachute mod that's recently been released that changes the staging icons colour depending on whether it is unsafe, risky or safe for you to deploy your parachutes, because of course reaching in here to right click to see that it's unsafe, it's a bit of a pain. So this is an excellent mod, so I'll put a link for that mod in the description as well. So we're just about to come into the thickest part of the atmosphere here at about 20 kilometres. it is still very unsafe to be deploying our parachutes. Bob seems blissfully unaware of the danger he's in, which is probably just as well. So 19 kilometres, there we go, thickest part of the atmosphere starting to enter that here. So we should be slowing down a lot more. So we need to get down to about 1,000 metres per second before these heating effects will start to dissipate. And it's at that point you start crossing your fingers, you're actually going to slow down sufficiently to be able to deploy your parachutes. Now if you listen carefully, the sound of the atmosphere is dropping. So again, that's another key that you've got through the worst of it. At 13 kilometres, you can see the atmosphere effects are now white as we start to rapidly slow down. Still got red icons there, so let's just test this mod. So there we go, the safe to deploy still shows as unsafe. So we're at 8 kilometres. Risky, they go amber. And safe, they go green. So yeah, it does actually work, so great. So let's detach the lower stage and deploy our parachutes. So we lost the lower stage. Poor old Jeb made a mistake there in the staging. We probably could have saved that. Let's unlock the steering and just allow our parachutes to have their necessary effects. So Jeb, check your staging next time. we don't need KOS anymore. So there's probably 1,000 credits gone lost there, but we do have plenty of cash. Cash is something we are doing pretty well at. So I don't think, yeah, that's scrap metal for Jeb's junkyard. It's not going to be reused. So it's 2.5 kilometres up above the terrain. So this is sea level. We're a little bit above sea level out there, so we're going to be in this little sort of lagoon area. And let's just accelerate ourselves down with physical time warp, just to get ourselves down to about, there we go, 800, 700 metres above the surface when our parachutes will start to open. Down to 5 metres per second, that's just perfect. Absolutely perfect. 800 metres above the surface. Let's have a look at what our science is supposed to be. We can do a temperature scan and we can do an EVA report. Should we risk an EVA report? No. We're not going to risk any science at this point. I just want to get ourselves down on the ground. I just want to get Bob safely down to the ground and all that lovely science we are holding in our various experiments. So let us just accelerate time. There's a bit of a ridge there. I hope we're not going to land on a slope. I don't think so. I did say we're going to land in the dark, but fortunately the ambient light adjustment mod is giving us a little bit of extra light. So let's just turn that. Let's just turn that up. Let's just click on. There we go. Turn that up, so you can see a little more of the surface there. Excellent. These chase cams, absolutely excellent. For their purpose. There we go. I think we have got a little bit of a ridge here, but I think we'll be fine, especially since we dumped the engine and fuel tank. We should be just fine. But 100 metres still to go. There we go, 100 metres still to go. No shadow, because of course we are at night, so we're just going to have to hope we are not landing on a substantial slope with a bit of a bang. We are only 4.5 metres per second. That's a good speed to be landing. So here we go. Almost there. Bit of a thump, but we're down. Excellent. Well done, Bob. Absolutely excellent. Smashing. Super. Great. So let's recover. Back at the Space Centre, we can have a look at our mission summary for the Mun Orb 1. As you can see, we had 13 experiments recovered for a total of 270 science. So we've got a grand total of 323 to spend. Parts, well, we lost a few parts, but never mind. We lost a few parts, but never mind. We did recover 4,000 funds, 500,000 funds available to us, so that's plenty. And as far as our crew, Bob has made it into space. He's gained 4 XP and advanced to level 1. Excellent. So with that said, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, Bob. Bye-bye.